Welcome back, dear listeners, to the Fright or Flight podcast, where we rank, recap, and review any horror movie in a given franchise.
Today we're talking about 1990's adaptation of the Stephen King novel, It.
Well, I'm Jumpscare Jer, and/or Geraldine, the Fright of the podcast.
And I'm Frankie, the Flight of the podcast.
Let's pop right into today's episode. So yes, we're talking about the iconic made-for-TV film / miniseries, It.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't know that it's not like it didn't have like a theatrical release, that it was a television thing.
Yeah. Runtime of 3 hours and 7 minutes total altogether.
It's a long one.
Very long.
Super long. The book is also very long. I don't know if you've ever seen it, especially a paperback version.
Yeah, we have one on the table over there. It's like 1,300 pages.
It's big.
It's so big.
Yeah, it's massive. I'm not a huge reader. I think I looked at the audiobook for it because I did read some of it. Mm-hmm. And the audiobook version is 45 hours long.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it's going to take a little bit of time. There's some people on YouTube who have done read it in 2-day challenge, read it in 3-day challenge. That would take me a couple of months at least.
It would have to really, really captivate me. Mm-hmm. I found that if books really get my attention, then I can probably venture out and read them in 2 or 3 days. Yeah,
it's very scary. There's a clown involved. I know a lot of people are scared of clowns. Mm-hmm. Are you one of these people with a fear of clowns?
I am not one of those people. I like clowns. They are scary in context, especially in scary films and stuff. And we'll definitely get into my experience with it at some point.
Okay.
But I don't know. I really enjoy clowns. It's not really been something that I've been like, ooh.
I've never been around them at all growing up. So when I first saw one, it is a very... I guess it's so interesting to know at one point there were really fun things. And now I don't think that's the case.
You know what's funny is that they used to be hired back in the day for kids' birthday parties. I have never once in my life had a kid's birthday party where I had clowns.
Do you regret that? If you had kids, would you be like, let's get all the clowns here?
Why not? Go ahead and start them early.
I will say I'm a big fan of Dumbo. Dumbo has clowns that are featured who are also kind of scary, though.
I mean, the whole, it reminds me of the drama masks, like the comedy and tragedy. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that to me. So, they're more funny than anything. And I think that's another beauty of this performance by Tim Curry is that it's really just well done and it's beautiful. It's hilarious in moments. He's just great. A really cool thing about this is that I didn't know this either. This is something that I learned today. It was nominated for a few different awards and won 2 different awards. So I don't know if you paid attention to the music, but I totally did. The music in this miniseries was fantastic. There are so many moments where it was creepy and it was intense. And so Richard Bellis, the composer, won an Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in Music Composition for a miniseries or a special for the dramatic underscore. Robert F. Shugru was nominated for Outstanding Editing for a miniseries or a special for single cam production, which is really awesome. Brandon Crane, who played young Ben, he was nominated for Best Young Actor starring in a TV movie, pilot, or a special.
I loved him.
He did really good, really, really good. And then we also won an ensemble award for the young versions of the characters, which I thought was really, really well deserved.
I didn't know that was an award, but I think that's super cool. Because ensembles either make it or they don't. It's really hard to do a film where you have a lot of characters. The reason the book is so long is because there's so many characters, and we got to cover each one of their backstories, personalities, perspectives. So I can understand how there should be an award for it because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Not only do we get to know them as children, but we get to know them as adults. And we get to follow with each of them and what they're doing. It's a long process.
Because the novel and the film, they jump back and forth between them as children and them as adults. It's not linear whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It's like this in the 50s, this in the 80s, this in the 50s, this in the 80s. And it keeps going back and forth.
It's very, very fun. I personally really enjoy it. I like a good time hop.
Yeah, I like it too.
I don't like when things stay the same the whole time. Sometimes it can be annoying, but things like Saw, when they go back and forth, but they're all lining up.
I think there's a level of intrigue for sure. It adds another level of interest for you to pay attention to.
And I just can't imagine reading this entire book because they had to read this book several times. I can't imagine reading a 1,300-page book several times to condense it.
Oh, the
no,
the
they
people
did.
Who adapted?
Yeah, they had to. They had to read it to condense it, and we'll talk about the differences because there's quite a few differences, but it's not bad. It's not bad per se.
What isn't bad?
like the differences between the book and the miniseries, because ultimately I think King was pleasantly surprised with it. But let's get into the cast. The cast, we have so many different people. The one person who stays consistent through the whole film, Pennywise the dancing clown, or also known as It, Tim Curry, my king. I love him.
He looks very terrifying.
I love him. Yeah. I love his makeup.
I've never seen, there's newer adaptations of this film, and the clown looks a lot different.
Very different.
I have seen the clown, but I think it's super cool that we can have two different iterations of the clown based on the novel,
And whenever we eventually get to that one as well, I think people were very nervous because this performance by Tim Curry was so iconic that they're like, you can't replace him. You can't beat him. But honestly, the two different performances between the two different clowns are so different. They're really incomparable because they're different films. They're different like tellings of the story. So I personally enjoy them both as their own.
Okay. Well, that should say, because I know you're nervous about a lot of, anytime there's like, we're going to remake this, you're immediately like, why would they do that? The original's already perfect.
Yes. Because for example, they're already doing that for American Psycho, which was a perfect, I haven't read the book, but it is a book to movie adaptation. I've heard the book is much worse, far worse than what we get in the movie. But Christian Bale does a fantastic job. Made in 2000 or 2003, somewhere like that. Early 2000s, either way. It's only been like 20 something years and they're going to redo it again for no reason. So it's just like, why? We don't need another one.
Yeah, but then we're going to be sitting here on this podcast and you're going to, whatever you just said about it, and be, they're incomparable. They're both, I enjoy both of them. You'll probably be saying about American Psycho.
We'll see. I'm open-minded about it, but it gets really tiring because we're entering an age right now where we're getting a lot of original content and it's amazing and I love it. There's also a lot of like recycling of stories.
Well, then just don't watch those.
You're right, but at the same time, I just don't understand why.
Because it's just money talks. That's what people want. That's what they go see. That's what they spend their money on at the movie theater.
I mean, I guess so. I'll see what happens. If it's going to be closer to the book or something, and that's probably the reason why they wanted to do it, like a closer adaptation, that's fine. I mean, I feel like sometimes it is beating a dead horse, For
sure. I mean, that's true. There's so many films nowadays that are just reboots and remakes, specifically from the 80s. And we talked about the score earlier. I think the score for this is very dated. It's from
very dated.
That time period for sure. And, we're covering it, and this is the first time I've ever seen it. Never really came across. I didn't really know what it was about. I knew what the clown looked like.
Okay.
I thought this whole film was set like at a carnival. This movie has nothing to do with a carnival.
Oh, no.
There's no carnival at all. There's no carnival, no circus. And I've been doing a lot of reading into the book just because after seeing the movie, I was enamored by the kids. And I thought it really spoke to me on a very certain level. I think it's fantastic that it was made for television.
Yeah.
Just because, we watched a few of the movies now. And I feel like, one, obviously, based on the length of the book, it'd be very difficult to put this down into a movie.
Yeah, one film.
One movie, while at least on TV, they got to get 3 hours worth of content out there. And, for the remakes, they made 2 whole different films for it. You know what I'm saying? So putting it in one movie, I think would have been a mistake. And I'm glad they did it for television. And I'm just interested now, and I've done some research on the book, and it is one of the most controversial Stephen King novels.
It really is, yeah. It is. But I also agree. I love that, honestly, getting children actors is difficult in any capacity. I mean, because children, are complicated and they're young and you can't, work with them for long hours. They have like restrictions and stuff too. But the cast that we get in this film between the children and the adults, first of all, the casting job is chef's kiss. Like you really get the people that look like the young versions of themselves, and they did a good job. And I think the only one that actually stands out that does not look like the younger version of the character was Ben, but they did work together. They all got to have a good relationship together in character development to work on like things that the character would do as a child that you would see transition into the adulthood and stuff. So they all had like little tells. Like if you paid attention, Stanley did this thing with his ear when he was afraid or something. So they all had like a little thing that the character would do. And I think between Brandon Crane and John Ritter, who played the young and older Ben, they both like kind of picked at their nails or like bit their nails kind of thing. So that was really fun to kind of watch.
So can we talk about the main 7 really quick? You know, the losers or whatever.
Yeah, the losers club.
Yeah, we have Bill, Ben, Mike, Beverly, Eddie, Richie, and Stanley between the 7.
Yep.
Do you have a personal favorite? Did any of them speak to you more than any of the other ones?
I've always really enjoyed Richie the most.
I was not expecting that. I'm surprised. I will say, you mentioned about them being similar, the adult actors and the kid actors. The adult actor for Richie doesn't look anything like how Seth Green, who portrays the kid, looks like now.
I think, though, they made a comment and said that he had a nose job, so they kind of addressed it in some way.
Okay, that's just because Seth Green looks the same as he did as a child as he does today.
I agree. So, I thought it was so funny because me and Bailey were watching it, and I was telling her, like...
We had a giggle fit.
Yeah, because he's, like, taller than the rest of the kids in this.
Yeah.
And I'm used to seeing him, like, the shortest person on set.
That is
so it's
true.
like, oh my gosh, he looks like he's, like...
Average height.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
And Bailey
mean.
said, yeah, he just stopped growing at this point. Is what
Yeah, he never hit a growth spurt. I love Seth Green, though. I sincerely love Seth Green.
He's the actor among all these that I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
And I had no clue he was in such an iconic film.
Yeah, I always forget that he was the younger version. Another one who was really notable was the young version of Beverly, Emily Perkins. She is known for the Ginger Snaps series in the horror community. It's a werewolf series.
Okay.
Really, really cool little franchise. Love it. She's just a really great actress. She's been in a lot of different things. I've seen her in, of course, a notable She's the Man with Amanda Bynes. She played one of those fun characters. So she's just been acting since she was a child. And I always forget because in my brain, this movie was out 8 years before I was even, like, born. So like I didn't even watch this until I was like, probably, I don't even know how old I was, but I was probably
at least a decade after it came out.
Not a decade, but
because a decade would have been 2000. You were 2.
Oh, a decade after it came out. Yes. Well, I wasn't watching it at 2. I don't think I could have probably comprehended the content, but like I would dare say, I don't know, somewhere in between 5 or so I probably watched it, and then I was like, cool, this is neat. Never even noticed because I hadn't seen this in such a long time. It was way better than I remembered. So revisiting it was a must.
It's just an interesting story. And I think, learning more about these novels and these film adaptations, I really come to respect Stephen King, whereas before I've kind of viewed Stephen King as more of, he is a figure that these kind of people like. And I wouldn't think so much about Stephen King, more so his fans and how, like, what kind of person they are. But now that I've gotten to read more of Stephen King, while his wording a lot of the time is very unsettling, not necessarily in like a creepy, disturbing way, but more so in other fashions that, I'm sure we'll discuss later on. I love his prose, and at page to page, he's entertaining the whole time through. A couple other of the actors that I'd like to mention my enjoyment of is one, the older actor for Mike.
Yes, I love him.
I love him. He's great. He's the rock of this movie, holds it down. He's very comforting to me.
He was in the notable TV show growing up for me, Sister, as the dad. And so I've always, I'm like, oh my God, like I recognize him instantly. That's Ray. He
was very comforting to me.
I absolutely love him. He's a very sweet kind of person. And I spent extra time watching a documentary that came out in 2022 about the movie, about the making of this film. It's on Amazon Prime if you want to watch it. It's called Pennywise, I think, like the story of it. Very good documentary. It's about 2 hours or so. So if you want to spend 2 hours watching it, you get to see all of these characters, a lot of them, like the children grown up, which is really fun.
Yeah.
Some of them have since passed, like the young version of Bill, Jonathan Brandis.
He did such a good job.
He passed at age 27. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't do further research onto what happened, but he is no longer with us, which is very sad. But the rest you get to see, and it was, I guess, put out in 2022, which is really cool.
That is really cool.
Tim Curry's in it. So
the other feature I'd like to talk about is the older version of Bill, Richard Thomas. I just wanted to ask you a question about him, both of you maybe.
I do recognize him.
What do you guys feel about him and his hairstyle?
I hate his hairstyle, personally.
You don't like the hair?
Just let your hair down, dude. Either let it down or let it go.
Bailey?
Yeah, he was giving big rat tail vibes. It wasn't a rat tail, but I don't know. It's just, if you're going to have like a slutty little like man ponytail, at least make it like a high ponytail. Don't do it like a low ponytail. But I think they might have like based it off of like Stephen King's appearance. Maybe actually,
no, he's bald in the book.
Yeah, I don't understand what the choice was.
Like when they were doing the character design in the movie, I'm saying that like Bill is supposed to be a foil to Stephen King himself because he's a horror author.
Yeah.
So like maybe they looked at Stephen King and they were like, "Hey, Stephen, what kind of hairstyle did you have when you were like 30 something?"
He stays doing that.
He does. I mean, we have this typewriter here on set for a reason.
I respect authors and their self-inserts. It's fine.
I like to see it. I like to see writers and stories. I feel like we're getting a lot of that right now in 2024.
Yeah.
But so I think it's really cool. Talking about sluttiness, I do think the older actor for Eddie, Dennis Christopher, he was serving.
Oh my God, right? I loved him.
Yeah, he was like,
I loved him so much.
He was adorable.
His vest, like his attitude.
Yeah, he had this 80s flamboyancy kind of thing going for him. I loved him so much.
I also loved him too. I don't know, there's some sort of comfort to his character that I find him and Richie very endearing.
Oh, really? I found a little...
Me too.
Older Richie I thought was a little annoying.
Older Richie was kind of annoying, but I also loved him because he was kind of like an annoying but cynical asshole. I'm like, I get it.
Okay, fair enough.
Richie and Eddie were my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you love them in this one, all I will say is you will love them in the newer ones.
Okay, I'm excited to check them out.
Yeah, I'm actually excited.
Yeah, I'm super excited to watch the rest of the It movies. I'm an It fan. I've been made an It fan. Oh my God.
And then I mean, it's going to be a whole freaking episode just to compare the two because they're so different and the filmmaking between the two and the time that they made them.
That's exciting.
So
hopefully by the time we get to those, I will have read the book version because I've been enjoying the novel quite a bit.
It's going to take me a year to read it, I bet. It's going to take me a year. It's just so long. There's no reason for it. All of the actors did so well, but I think that it's really cool that they spent time to get to know like the young actor playing them and the old actors they all like spent time together to really get to know like the characters as well, but they also like wanted to get to know their younger counterpart and develop something amongst themselves of how can we do this to where like it's kind of that continuity we want.
I didn't think they did a good job at that. I'm not saying that as a super criticism. I'm only saying it in the sense of like, there's a point in this movie, me and Bailey were watching it, like halfway through I asked Bailey, do you think it was easier to be an actor in the 90s? And I do think the bar is higher now. Because I feel like not that any of the adult performers were bad. I was super impressed by the kid performers, by the way. But the adult performers, like maybe it was just the kind of acting that was done at the time, or maybe it's because it was on television that they had a certain kind of direction. But I felt like I could have participated in this movie somehow. Like I feel like I could have stepped in for any of these guys and given maybe a more dramatic performance.
Well, I think that the thing is that it was made for TV, so they were getting the best of the TV actors. So they were mostly TV actors at that point. So I think that there is a difference between TV acting and just regular movie film acting.
Now I will say I love the TV vibes
because the TV made for TV is typically a little bit more dramatic and not that it's not as serious, but it's more dramatic.
Just more overt.
But now we've had a huge shift in the movies versus TV conversation. Now TV, I would dare say, is more thought out, more enveloped versus what we get in movies because you have these seasons that continuously go on and writers who were doing it for years.
We're living in a post Game of Thrones world.
Yes, we are, which I'm glad you mentioned that because that's how they were ideally trying to do this originally. They were going to, it was the script Bible is what it was called, was 8 hours long originally. And they were like, yeah, cut it back down to like 4 hours. The director at the time that they had to do this was George Romero, known in the horror movie industry for his zombie films. Yeah. He's great. Father of zombie movies. Love him. He was like, nah, I'm out because of that. They got Tommy Lee Wallace, but I think that Tommy Lee Wallace did such a good job. I think that George Romero, we would have gotten a completely different movie.
Yeah, for sure.
It would have been way more horrifying, I think, if we also got George Romero instead. But I think that this works so well because there's also restrictions. So that's something that we do have to keep in mind with this version is that it is made for TV. So
I'm very happy with it. I like this kind of era of television, if I'm being honest with you. Like, I've been watching Criminal Minds a lot, and I've been watching like older seasons, and it's such a different vibe back then. I don't know what it is, but every decade kind of has its own vibe, and just I find a lot of comfort in like it being a little crappy, you know what I mean, and everything being lit just complete. There's no dramatic lighting in this film, like besides when they're in the sewers, and I kind of enjoy an aspect of that.
Yeah, I get it. So let's kind of, I guess, shift from some of the characters because we do get to know them throughout, and we'll have many conversations further because there's a lot of content to get through. But let's talk about it. What is it? So Pennywise is known as the dancing clown. He says it in both film adaptations, but he's simply not of this world. It is said that he eats children, feeds on fear. It can manifest into your worst nightmares or deepest desires to trick you into becoming his next Happy Meal.
Now, I want to talk about this a little bit because, like I said, I've been delving into the book a little bit.
Yeah.
And the clown isn't nearly as prominent in the books as he is in the film. And in the film, I heard some people criticize it a little bit as an adaptation just because the film makes it seem like Pennywise is it, while it is like this whole other entity, basically, and Pennywise is just like an aspect of it. And I don't think there's any problem. And, adaptations, I think the film has to have some sort of mascot. And when you have somebody like Tim Curry, of course, you're going to show him off. But I did find it super cool knowing that in the novel, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to dive into this a little bit because it was interesting to me. You mentioned that Pennywise is basically the mascot for the It movies.
Yeah.
Even though, interestingly, he's not a mascot necessarily at all in the book. He's there, but he's not as prominent. Right. But as me, somebody who has never watched horror movies before starting this podcast and has never been interested in them, the only way that I knew it was through Pennywise.
Yeah.
The iconography. Pennywise was the It character. And then, with the new movies that just came out recently, they surged in popularity. I feel like the second that the first remake came out, and it's just all I saw everywhere was Pennywise, 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 Pennywise. And it's just he is synonymous now because of these movies. He's synonymous now with the story, and I think I think it was actually very important for them marketing wise to get such an iconic mascot, because otherwise I don't think people would have saw a movie named It, and I don't think they would have remembered it enough. If the bad guy was the thing that we see at the end of the movie or the movies, I assume, I don't think that it would have as much lasting power if we didn't have the mascot of Pennywise to fall back on for marketing.
I agree with you. And, the ground laid by Tim Curry, I think that has a lot to say about it. But yeah,
Love Tim Curry.
And the novel, maybe we talk about it a little bit in the rest of the book. It is kind of like a Bogart from Harry Potter. I don't know if anybody's a Bogart. And the Bogart is this kind of entity that kind of takes whatever you fear and like turns into that thing. And we see that a bit in the film.
I think from what I've done research on, you see more of it in the newer movie. They do it a little bit better with the shape-shifting of the different things, which is very fucking cool because of the technology that we have now versus what they were working with back then. He shape-shifted more into different things. So he was the clown. That's how he presented himself most of the time. But he was also so many different other things. And I think you see it more towards them being adults than, at least in my opinion, I feel like you see less of the clown while they're adults versus the other things that they're afraid of.
Now, what's your relationship with Pennywise the Clown? I know your family's big into horror and stuff. Like, are you a particular fan of Pennywise?
Love him. I've never there's some stuff there, but mostly love him. I grew up with my dad working in haunted houses, so that was something that my dad did. He did dress up as Pennywise, and I did dig through some photos to find photos to show. So my dad did do like really cool Pennywise makeup, made his own headpiece as well. So like the little bald cap part with like the wigs.
That's cool.
Yeah, my family has always been very much into the horror stuff, so it's really fun. And Pennywise is so iconic. So my dad, I think, also I don't know if he either bought his teeth or he made his teeth as well. Very cool. Very creepy.
And you've done some similar kind of work. There's a photo of you wearing like doll makeup. Would you ever be interested in like doing like a Pennywise kind of thing?
I don't think I could do it justice, but I would try.
Yeah?
I would try very hard. I don't mind clowns. Clowns are fun to me. I think they're kind of sinister in the way that they present as like these happy, silly, goofy things.
Kind of like Sam Hain from Trick or Treat.
Sam. Yes, but like in the way that they present as like these, innocent things, these goofy little guys,
They're devious.
But really they're kind of little shits.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
they like to, I don't know.
You relate to that, I assume.
I like to scare people. It's fun.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I have not personally been a clown. I feel like I could do pretty well. Mm-hmm. Also, my stepdad, I do have a clip from him to like interviewed him a little bit today, because he is known for doing clown makeup and stuff, and him and his friend Bo do characters called Clowny and B-Town, where they say that they kind of go into like this different persona. Mm.
So I assume they're fans of Pennywise. Do you think that's an influence on their material?
Absolutely it is. So I'll definitely play that clip for you a little bit later on, where he talks about that and what he kind of loves about Pennywise and all of the things, because he's iconic. He really is synonymous with it.
Right.
I couldn't think of a better mascot though, and originally Stephen King's idea behind it, making this was, he didn't want to be typecast, but he's like, well, I'm going to give him the ultimate monster book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like he's like throwing all these monsters together.
We didn't see a mummy in the movie, but there's a mummy in the book.
Yeah. And he wanted to kind of just throw everything in there, but I think that he almost kind of like fucked himself a little bit, put himself in a different loop, because this was so horrifying to so many audiences.
Yeah.
And then it became another thing. So now we have a whole like generation of other fans who are probably going to continue to want to see more.
I just wonder how big like Pennywise is. Are we scared of clowns now in the year 2024, majority wise, because of Pennywise?
We'll definitely get it. I have a whole section about clowns.
Okay.
There's a lot of history there.
Yeah,
I'm excited
a lot of American
to get to
history. Yeah.
So we'll definitely talk about that. But let's dive a little bit further into the book, because we're talking about the differences between the book and the miniseries. So this is strictly based on this miniseries versus the book. There are so many different things that are different. Apparently, the bullying was way harsher than what we got. And
in general, the novel is quite a deal more violent than the movie.
And disgusting.
Yeah, we don't get to see Georgie's arm being ripped off in the movie. They mention it, but in the book, it goes into more detail about it.
Yeah. Also, Henry Bowers, the big bad bully, he poisoned one of the losers from the Losers Club, one of their dogs, and watched it die. Mm-hmm. That's horrible. I'm really glad we didn't see that, because I hate seeing animals dying.
Yeah, I'm not animals dying in movies. There's a really funny line in Kick-Ass 2, the movie, where the villains, end up beating up a lot of our protagonists up or whatever. One of the goons is like, "Oh, should we take the dog?" And the main bad guy's like, "No, we're not evil." And I'm like, "Yes, thank you. I appreciate that."
I love that. Like, leave the animals and the babies alone. They didn't do anything. And so it opens with Georgie's death in the book. We get a different opening. We get an opening with a different girl. Forget her name. I think it was like Lorianne or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's outside on a little tricycle, and her mom's like, "Girlie, let's get inside. It's gonna storm soon." And then she's like, "Okay, ha ha ha." But like her mother was like airing out her laundry on the lawn, and Pennywise was just chilling, like, "Hey, girl."
Yeah.
And the little girl's like, "Oh."
Great way to condense that, I feel like. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that goes on. I watched the film first, and then I started reading the novel. Mm-hmm. And then I got to the first 10 chapters, and I was like, none of this is in the movie. And and I think none of it had to be in the movie. I think that the book definitely has more themes if you're interested in, finding not just more lore about the story, but just other aspects of the story that might speak to you more or whatever. Like there's, we talked about there being more violence in the book. There's also just a lot more talk about bigotry and its different forms, like anti-Semitism and being and that is demonstrated a little bit in the movie. There's a few lines specifically said by our Henry Bowers, who likes to poison dogs. And maybe we'll get to it later.
Yep. I actually have it listed that the book features more racism, anti-Semitism, and misogyny than have been displayed in either of the films.
And sex. So much sex.
Yep, I had that listed later because we're gonna have a whole talk about it.
There's gonna be a whole discussion.
I'm excited.
Yeah, the book marks Pennywise's return for the 30 years later with a hate crime where two locals are harassing a gay couple, and the local assholes go to jail and include part of the trial in the book and whatnot. And we don't get to see that at all in the movie.
No, and it's interesting here too because one of them gets sent to Shawshank.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't know that Stephen King put references to his other books.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah, he does that pretty often, and a lot of his books take place in Maine specifically.
Yep. Yeah, they do take place in Maine.
Tons of jokes about there just being
which is really funny,
horror monsters and serial killers in Maine.
You would think that a lot of like Maine locals would love that. I don't think they do. I don't think they.
Really?
Yeah.
They're not into it.
No, I don't think so. So we get several silly montages that are probably not in the book at all. Like the whole bike thing with the silver. So Ray and Bill are like, "Oh, bike."
In general, love silver. There's a point where Bill's
it's
like,
a cool character.
I forget what he says, but he says like, "Oh, hey, silver, hi-yo," something like that.
It's really nerdy, and I love it.
Hi-ho, silver.
Yeah. I love it.
I think that's a quote from something else.
It's got to be something.
I think it's like He-Man or like some like cartoon.
Interesting.
We also get another silly montage with them having a happy-go-lucky dinner at the Chinese restaurant before like there's all this like chaos that's ensuing, but they're all like, let's catch up.
I think it's great. God. I think it adds a level of levity.
I also love it too, because it's like, oh, at the end of it all, they're still like friends, and it's the connection that brings them back and stuff. So I personally love it as well. Everything happens in a completely different order than it happens in the book.
Yeah, I think the way they split it up in the film, in the miniseries, is interesting, and I think it's appropriate. Where like you follow mostly the kids in the first half, and then the adults in the second half.
Yep.
I was telling Bailey while we were watching it, I was like, I'm seeing the kids a lot, and I know we're going to transition at some point, and I'm kind of nervous about it because I love these kids, and I think their performances are great. I have connected with them, and I don't know if I'm going to feel the same way about these adults. But by the end of the movie, I did. I did.
If you feel this way about the original, you're gonna feel such a different way about like the other kids in the other movies, because they're so good.
I think it was so interesting how you and I, Frank, both of us kind of felt this trepidation of like going from like relating to the kids or like feeling attached to the kids, and then thinking that we're not going to be attached to the adults, but then we are. I wonder if that is mostly just because of our age and because we're adults now. And so we see these adults who are like struggling, even though they're successful and all this stuff. And then they're reconnecting with their childhood friends and stuff. I wonder if that was why it was easier for us to connect to them now. Whereas if we watched this movie when we were like teenagers, would we have cared for the adults then? I don't think I would have.
I want to kind of pose that question to you both, and just that I feel like sometimes when I was a kid, I didn't want to see other kids. And, they cast adults for kids and teenagers back when we were younger a lot more often than they do now. I mean, you look at the Percy Jackson show, television, they're all kids and they're supposed to be kids. But if that was made in 2005, they'd all be 27.
Yeah.
I mean, when it was made, the original Percy Jackson movie, they were in like their 20s.
And I kind of enjoy that more just because as a kid, I feel like I didn't want to see other kids. I kind of wanted to see something that was like what I would think of me as.
I guess whenever I watch a movie, I don't think about that at all. Like in my brain, I'm like, oh, I'm just watching this character. Like I don't question it unless we're watching Christine and that guy looks like he's 40 and he's supposed to be 17. If there's a huge difference, then I'm like, whoa, what's happening? Like if there's a huge disconnect, but if they look close enough, it doesn't even register in my mind.
Okay.
But I will notice, I will not notice, but I will say that like the kids in this don't really like appear to me as 12, 13-year-olds like they're supposed to. What do they appear to you? I don't know, like they feel like it's a larger range, which they're all around the same age.
I mean, the young kid for Eddie, he looks extra small.
Yeah, and he's 12. He's actually 12 when he's filming this, and so I'm like, okay, like, but they don't appear that way at all. Well, so then, like in my brain, we're supposed to believe 30 years later they're what 42 or something, and I'm like, what? Like I just didn't. Because to me, they look a little bit younger.
They look early 30s to me.
Yeah, they look way too young.
Well, the time gap is 27 years.
Well, that's what they say, but they say 30 years in this one. It's not specific to what the book says, or even I think in the other film, they also mention, I think, the 27-year gap. It's not really clear because then when Richie's in town, the Paramount Theater that he loves said something like R.I.P. Richie Tozier or something like that, and it said like 1950 to 1990, and then I'm like, okay, so then they were like what 12, and this is supposed to take place 30 years later. So then I was doing the math, and I was like, so it would have had to be 1960. The math ain't mathing because they would have had to be 10. You know what I mean?
No.
Yeah. If he was born in 1950.
Okay, which I don't think is the case. Is that what it said? 1950?
That's what it said, 1950 to 1990. So
he was...
It's 1990 currently when he's supposedly going to die.
So he's 40 years old at that point. 30
years prior was 1960. He would have been 10.
Right. Which is about the age they were in the novel.
But it makes no sense.
How does it make no sense?
They didn't look 10. So I'm like, what? This doesn't make any sense. And then you talk about like them having like this disgusting child orgy. Like,
yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
So it's very problematic, essentially. And the math was not mathing for me. So I was like, what?
Well, I will say, despite how they look in the film or whatever, to speak on the novel again, in the book, they are approximately 11 to 12 years old. And that's when they do have that orgy, is at that age. And I think that's actually a really important part.
I think it's not an important part. It shouldn't have been included.
It's unfortunately an important part.
I agree. I think it's a very important part.
The symbolism there makes sense, and I understand like King's reasoning. Like this is supposed to. They're feeding on children. Like it is feeding on children, so he's attracted to childlike ability there, and they're like, oh yes, let's just run a train on Beverly because that's what adults do.
It's disturbing.
It's disturbing, and I understand the reasoning. Because
it's unsettling.
But I don't think it's needed at all.
It's not needed. And I think it's really interesting to me.
I will let you know gladly, both adaptations of the films do not include it. They said, fuck that shit. We're not doing a child orgy.
And I think a big reason that is, besides, obviously concerns over audience reactions to that, is that Stephen King, I think, is very... We're talking about this one scene. Every chapter of his book gives you the sense of it's something like that. He often talks about Beverly's nipples throughout the novel, and in this movie, in Misery, when we were doing the Misery in the novel, I read part of it, and when he got banged up, Paul Sheldon, they talked about like how his cock was like, and how that is integral to Stephen King, and that's what you find
integral to the story. I don't understand.
Here's the thing. This is my whole point. Is that here, I'll give two little tangents. One, I recently watched two different people review this novel, the novel version, not the movie version. One of them was from America. The other one was from the UK. And I thought it was really interesting because the person in the UK, and evidently people in the UK, this doesn't faze them at all. When they hear bringing up nipples and cocks here and there at chapter after chapter, apparently they don't even notice. It's more of an American thing for people to be like, oh my gosh, like, geez Louise.
Well, you also have to know that we're from the South, and we're rooted in religious, like...
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, we're in the Bible Belt, so for
us... I will say, like, depending on where you're from, you're going to feel differently about this. The other thing I was going to say, somebody who does on our sister podcast, Cozy Cottage, I thought it was really interesting when they talked about Stephen King, because they were talking about how, like, they have an issue reading Stephen King novels because he is so adept at just exposing like inner darkness and like just, I know that sounds cringy as hell, but I can't word it nearly as well as she did. But she was just talking about how it makes her uncomfortable how exposed Stephen King is to these things and how nonchalantly he talks about it. And I think he's really good at that. And I think where you and me, and probably most 99% of people who read the It novel and come across these things, or even in the other novels, how he's just blatantly talking about these sexual things and 11-year-old girls' nipples, that he really doesn't view any of it through that lens. Like, it's all very like a doctor, like it's abstained from him. You know what I mean? And I think it goes to show how the different kind of mentality that he has into this, and that I think a lot of it that makes us uncomfortable is from our own grievances and our own positions. That's not to excuse any of it by any means.
Well, I mean, being a child is hard enough growing up, especially with that age group. Your body's changing. You don't want to bring attention to it. You don't want to think about it. And in the book, apparently, Beverly checks her boobs every day to like make sure that they've grown in that time. It's like,
because that's real though. Like, it's uncomfortable for us to read it, but Stephen King knows that this is a thing that happened. But he knows all the sexual darkness that you come across.
I don't think that as a woman though, that's accurate for every woman. I don't think growing up, I definitely didn't go, oh, they grew overnight. Let's check them every, like, that's just, I agree with you. That is not the experience. And I think that it's just not fucking needed.
I think a lot of people talk about that in general and how Stephen King writes female characters in his novels.
It's kind of cringe.
And I can't speak to it. I'm not a woman myself, but I know that there's a lot of criticism of it. And of course, from other women who say it, I'm like, oh yeah, I agree. You're the one to have a take on this, you know. So I hear you and I respect it, and I lean towards that, especially since this was written in the 80s. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it definitely is like a male's perspective. You know, we talk about Mel Gays often on the podcast.
Yep.
A male's perspective on girls. Like it is. I'm sure Stephen King thought that was happening.
You know, I could write a whole dissertation about this. But I'm going to try and summarize my thoughts as quickly as possible. But I think a lot of the frustration, at least for me, that comes into play around this is, you know what, if Stephen King, who writes weird, disturbing novels, writes weird, disturbing sex between 12-year-olds, you know, at some point I have to accept the fact that, like, oh, well, what did I think I was going to sign up for?
That's,
you know,
that's
it's
fair.
a weird,
that makes sense.
He's a weird, disturbing man with weird, disturbing novels.
Yeah.
You know, he's one of the most prolific writers of our time, and I think it's necessary to understand that. I think part of the biggest frustration is that if you don't read Stephen King, but obviously you know who Stephen King is because he's so prolific, because he has these movies and franchises and these books that are so well known, nobody ever mentions how over-sexualized he does anything. It is never mentioned by anyone, by any fan, be it man, woman, non-binary, whoever. Nobody ever mentions it. And it's so frustrating to me that we have an example of another man who is an author, but also just, you know, a popular, famous figure, but especially as an author who just gets away with doing all of this sexual stuff, and it never gets mentioned by any of his fans how messed up it is, I feel like, most of the time. And it's just, I don't know. As somebody who reads often, I see women who are authors who get, like, cancel culture rampant over just because they didn't use the right connotation in one Instagram post or something, and like they don't have enough black people in their novel, so it's like the worst thing ever. You need to cancel them and never read their novels again. But if Stephen King is over here writing an orgy between 12-year-olds back in the 80s, oh well, you know, it's fine because it's Stephen King.
It's a double standard.
It is a double standard.
Everybody's like, oh, it's Stephen King.
Standard.
You know,
it is a double standard. And I'm not saying that where I'm trying to shit on Stephen King. I think I have a greater understanding of what's going on now. It doesn't mean that I like it. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's a weird man writing weird man stories.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to be weird and over-sexualized. I've come to the understanding of that. But it's just, to see the double standard once again, it's frustrating.
It is very frustrating. But we'll go through some of the different things that happen in the book versus the movie with the characters as well. So we get Bill. He's the same in both versions, essentially, except for he's bald as an adult. Yeah. In the book, he's also a horror author.
So let's, you know, back up a bit. I feel like we need to have a conversation about this, you know, about his hair.
No, we don't.
Where do you feel, you know, you said you're not a big fan of his hair.
I hate it.
Do you like the idea of him being bald instead?
No. What they should have done was just take the scissors and cut at the end of the ponytail, and then that would have been fine. Like some kind of wavy look would have been fine for the times. Okay. You don't need the George Washington ponytail. It looks god awful. Okay.
We can move on. I just wanted to have that quick little discussion.
God, I hate it. It's almost as bad as the horseshoe hair that we talked about during the Krampus episode. Oh, okay. I don't like it.
I thought you were going to talk about The Shining and...
No. Okay. Well, that was also a terrible hair too, but that's neither here nor there. Bill Hanscom, which I like that last name, and also kind of like, it almost sounds like the word handsome, which later he becomes very handsome. I don't like this like arc for him, unfortunately. I think that it's just, you know, their typical arc, but I think that they each have their own thing going on, and then they also have a horrible thing that's happening at home as well, which they're all relatable. But Ben is quote unquote chubby, but he's really not that chubby at all. He looks normal to me personally as a child. But he's super smart. He's in the library more apparently. He's a successful architect in both versions, but in the miniseries, he's more promiscuous and doesn't really think of home. But in the book, apparently, he flies home every chance he gets. Also, the same story with his asshat coach with the track team. Right. That still remained the same.
Very Forrest Gump.
We have Richie Tozier, known to be a popular radio host / DJ, but in the miniseries, he's a famous comedian. Yeah. So he's still kind of, it's similar, but not quite the same.
He does a lot of voices.
Yeah.
I said this when Franklin and I were watching the movie. Obviously, I don't think this actually correlates, but in my mind, Richie in this original TV series is just Conan O'Brien. I just view him as Conan O'Brien. I love Conan O'Brien.
I would, you say that, and I would love to see him, like, especially since Seth Green as a kid in the movie, he's a redhead.
Oh my god!
So to see him then as an adult version, it's Conan.
Conan needs to do a skit. I know he's not on TV anymore, but he needs to do a skit where instead of Richie, it just goes from Seth Green, who is so short, to him
being so tall.
Yeah.
I would just love to see Conan interact with Pennywise. And just be straightforward with him, like, hey, clown.
But you can't tell me that Conan wouldn't, like, act like Richie does in the TV series where he's like, no, fuck this. I'm leaving. I don't want anything to do with it.
And I can see his crazy hair, the little hops in his hair whenever he freaks out.
Love
Then we have Mike Hanlon. So he's very interested in the history of Derry, which they portray in the miniseries. He ends up being the town librarian. I put town library, LOL. I can't type. The book has definitely more information, but it goes through him and like the research covered in the book and narratively all of the crimes and the events that were by the hands of Pennywise that he was responsible for. We don't get enough of that shown in the miniseries, but again, that's kind of a lot.
So perfect. Over. What kind of kid shows up to like show and tell and brings like, here's the history of our town, and then he grows up to be a librarian? Perfect. Love it. Perfect for Mike. I love Mike. Mike's great.
Mike's a great character. Very, very endearing. Eddie Kaspbrak, he's one of my favorites as well, of course. Overbearing mother in both versions.
Do you relate to that?
Overbearing mother?
Yeah.
No,
your mother laid back, chill, cool.
Well, I'm depending on the day, but I mean, that's most mothers. My mother is not like this, though.
I feel like I would say I have an overbearing mother in a lot of ways. Like, she's always texting me, telling me she tells like, hey, make sure you make an appointment for the doctor. For me, not for me, for her, for my mom. She makes me do like a lot of her errands, a lot of her stuff. She's always nagging me about like, hey, make sure you do that. Make sure you do that. I want you to show her this on Mother's Day.
It is important to mention that your mom is Spanish speaking.
Yes.
As am I.
Yes.
What kind of excuse is that?
You're in a majorly English speaking.
She has several sons, and it's always me.
You're the eldest son, so she parentifies you, unfortunately.
Yes, this is true.
Goodness. Okay. As an adult, Eddie runs a limo service, but in the book, he's married to a woman who's just like his mother. We don't see that in the miniseries. He's still living with his mother.
I love that. That's such an easier explanation. I love that they do that.
Yeah.
Because in the movie, he doesn't have a wife at all. In the book, it's somebody who's just like his mom, which happens every day. I know that's what people end up doing. That's why I'm with Bailey, and I think it's super smart that in the movie they just we're not going to explain, add another character.
Are you trying to die?
Character.
No, wait. So in the book, does Eddie has he had like sex?
Yes, because later on they did
Okay.
that. They also did that, orgy thing. That I guess it happens like somewhere in the middle of the book. They stop
it. It happens at the end.
No, because it happens before they kill it. So it's not them as adults, it's them as children.
That happens at the same time in the novel. Towards the end, they battle. In the movie, it's like in the middle of the movie, they face it, and at the end of the movie, they face it. In the novel, they do it both kind of similarly towards the end of the novel.
But I'm assuming it's flashbacks. But that means that he's had sex in the book versus in the movie, he says he's a virgin.
Yeah, that's right.
That was his big thing.
I wonder if they did it this way in the TV series to like, it was the 90s. They couldn't show gay people on TV. But I wonder if they were like, oh, we're trying to make him gay, but we can't make him gay.
When I was watching the movie, we'll get into it a little bit later about some of the theories before I learn more about it, actually. But I did have some thinkings. That was one of them. I thought like, oh, this means he's gay. And they had a little conversation about like, he's demisexual. Like he's not just attracted. He only can do that kind of thing with somebody he loves. And the only people he loves are his friends. Very sweet and heartbreaking.
So I don't want to say too much without giving it away. But there are people who really, really love Richie and Eddie.
Me too.
And in the newer ones, it's a little bit more queer-coded and homoerotic between them. It's not expressly said, but it is alluded that they love each other. But it's not, we don't really know. But they think they lean more into that.
Queer-baited again.
They do really lean into it, and I love it. I live for it. I'm not going to lie.
I'm excited to watch them.
So then we have Stanley, a successful accountant who unalives himself in both versions, except in the book, it delves much deeper into trouble with conceiving a child with his wife and his marriage. And in the book, instead of using razor blades, to just like do small cuts and be a little bit drops of blood. He like chops himself up.
Yeah, this is also where we get most of the anti-Semitism in the novel, because Stanley and his wife are both Jewish, and they talk about like I'm telling you the whole backstory about like everything that happened after that summer, and like how he got a wife and how he got a job and how he got a next job and how they end up being successful. They want kids, and then in the movie it's just like, hey, mom just called. She bugged me again about having kids.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot more context in the book, but either way, Stanley is one of my least favorite of the characters. I think he was just all right.
You don't really get to know him though.
I did like his skepticism though, because I feel like that person lives in a lot of our groups, like somebody who's a little more like, I don't want to deal with this. It breaks my brain too much. I want to stay away from it as far as I can.
He was very logical thinking, like he on the rational versus like emotional brain.
Where are you on that spectrum?
I'm definitely more emotional than I am like the logical side. I mean, I ain't gonna sugarcoat it. I think with my heart, not my brain.
That makes sense. I agree. Yeah, I don't often find you thinking with your brain.
Like I get my feelings hurt a lot, so like I wear my heart on my sleeve kind of thing. Like I don't really put a lot of like logic into some of those things. I'm really like motivated by my feelings.
And would you say that you picked a partner that exemplifies that?
No, he's the opposite. He's very much logical, which is a good balance, I think, because whenever I'm using my feelings and my heart to guide me, he's like, why would you do that? And like he is thinking like on the brain side, like this doesn't make sense. But it helps me to kind of keep me grounded.
Do you feel like the opposite happens, where like he's being logical and you're like, no, you got to follow your heart, and like you help him feel more grounded?
I think so. I think that we both can kind of help each other understand the other thought process more, because I would say that I'm more emotionally intelligent and aware than he is.
Interesting.
But he's, too smart for his own good kind of thing, and doesn't really think like emotionally a lot. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it's definitely interesting, but Stanley is that kind of character. And I really do feel like with the new movies, you get to know the characters a little bit more than what we get in here. So I think that they delve more into Stanley, which I love him more in the new one than this one, which stinks because you don't get to know him. So like whenever he does unalive himself, I feel like there's no real connection to his character other than they're just like,
he's gone. This shit's serious.
Yeah. Beverly, mostly the same in both the movie and the book. She has an overbearing and abusive father, ends up with an overbearing and abusive partner. In the book, apparently he's more like beer belly kind of guy. Yeah. But in the series, he is like really like 80s kind of
slim.
Yeah.
I will say, we talk about the novel and the movie. A lot of people, as you may not be surprised by, really don't like Beverly in either adaptations. Like they think she is, the way she's written isn't the most forgiving for women viewers and readers.
Yeah, she's kind of a wet blanket.
Yeah.
I mean, I have mixed feelings. I think all of the actors who have portrayed her have done a fantastic job, especially with what they're given. But I would agree. I think that it's also just kind of for the shock. Because it's no different than what you get in, like, it's just a lot easier for the woman sexual abuse and physical
and that happens,
abuse.
I mean, in the novel,
kind of trope to, we
don't see it as much in the movie, but in the dad, in the book, he, like, this is going to be, graphic for anybody listening, but he says something along the lines like, I beat you because I want to fuck you.
Yeah, he wants to check her hymen is what I was reading about. And I was like, this is absolutely gross.
It is.
Kind of reminds me of what the rapper T.I. I think he said something like that.
Oh,
like
he wanted a couple years ago. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, he wanted to make sure his daughter's hymen was intact or something. And I'm like,
you got T-rooted issues, buddy.
Yeah, that's weird. That's weird behavior.
That's very strange.
So yeah, they just turned a weird blind eye. They don't really allude to it much in the miniseries, but they do show it a little bit more in the other movies. They don't like outright show it. So I'm thankful for that, but it is explained a little bit better in the new movies.
I did want to say in the TV series, I'm very thankful none of the like hypersexual stuff is mentioned in the TV series, especially since that seems like the crux of Beverly's entire character is just being a sexual object. She's instead a wet blanket in the TV series, but I much prefer that over a sexualized object. Yep. She's thankfully not over-sexualized. She is a romantic interest for Ben the entire time. But one thing I really loved that they showed in the TV series is that Beverly is like very affectionate. Everybody's very affectionate with Beverly when she's an adult. And it's at first I was a little worried about it, but it's not in a way that sexualizes her except for Ben. And I'm okay with that. I like how everybody's like holding hands with Beverly, hugging Beverly. Like I like that. That was good for me. I enjoyed it.
I am on the opposite side of that spectrum where I was a little weirded out by some of that. Not the holding hands part, but like hugging is fine. Or like, like rubbing your friend's shoulders. But like they're all kissing each other on the mouth. And I was like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah,
Were you worried about germs?
That was a little weird.
No, I don't. I wouldn't walk up to my friend and be like, oh, hey.
You don't kiss your parents?
Not like, no. I'm on the cheek,
well, a
maybe.
lot of cultures kiss on the lips.
I
had to adjust to it. I just, at first... When you first see Beverly as an adult and she just kisses Bill full frontal on the mouth. Yeah, it was like that was a little weird for me. But you know what? I adjusted.
But that was like open mouth kisses. Like I'm like, oh, okay.
I adjusted though. I was like, you know what? This friend group, they're just all extremely close and they do genuinely love each other. It may not be romantic. It might be like a deep platonic love in the TV series specifically. That's what I'm going to delude myself into believing. Because if I view it in that light, it was very wholesome and I enjoyed it.
I agree. It's very wholesome.
I just can't get behind it. It's weird. I just would never greet my friends and be like, hey. Like, I just can't.
I don't know. It doesn't bother me.
We'll get there. We'll work our way there, as a culture.
Oh, as a culture.
The French, the Italians, the Slavic, they do that all the time. Yeah. And I support it.
Yeah, if that's what you do, 1,000%. I mean, it's just the area that we're raised. I'm just not used to that. It's just like,
ew. Get that away from me. Would it weird you out if your mom oh hey Geraldine, give you a kiss on the cheek?
No, kisses on the cheek, pecks on the cheek are fine.
You'd be fine with it.
Pecks on the cheek are fine. That's normal. Like if
Are you used to it? Okay, let's say it's Dagan.
My brother?
Yeah, give you a hug on the cheek.
That's fine. Kiss on the cheeks is fine.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be out of place.
Mouth kisses to me are romantic.
Okay.
Like I think that's like kissing my partner. Like if somebody else was like friends with my boyfriend and they walk up to him and they're like, oh hey Patrick, and I'd be like, the fuck is happening?
Okay.
Do we need to go outside?
Oh, okay. And then no, that's what we do.
The fuck? That's what we no. You better kiss me too then. Oh, make it even. Okay. But no, that's just weird.
Doesn't want any kissing FOMO.
Yeah.
That's just weird. I don't know. But I was like, they're really like extra close. So I guess that was their way of making up for the orgy.
Yeah, I guess so.
The book, of course, again, more violent, more bloody, more upsetting than what we get to see. Henry Bowers is more extreme in his violence as well. The actor who played Henry Bowers as a child wanted to show more of that violence, but again, they were restricted because it is a made-for-TV thing.
Yeah.
So you can't do a lot of that. They downplayed some of the sexual awakening thing. We talked about Beverly checking her breasts to make sure they're growing overnight. Her father's very interested in checking her hymen/virginity. It is alluded, though, that Pennywise has taken him over in that scene. However, I personally am doubtful because I'm cynical and I think the worst. We didn't talk about the blood oath. Apparently, they also had the orgy, but then right after that, they're all like, yeah, let's blood oath. They actually were going to film a scene like that, but ultimately were told no because this was after the big AIDS thing, so they did not because they didn't want to promote that kind of for anybody.
Now, have you ever partaken in a blood oath?
No, but that would make more sense to me than the orgy, I think. Like, oh, we're connected by blood, so we feel each other. We know. Yeah. That would make more sense to me in my brain.
Now, have you ever had that experience? Kind of, did you ever have, like, when you were 4 years old, 5, 6, 7, another kid that you were like, oh, we're best friends. Let's make a pact. We'll always stay friends forever.
I've said that, but I've never.
Has the pact ever gone through or have you always drifted apart from these friends?
Usually drifted apart.
It's because you didn't do the blood oath.
I'm not doing a blood oath. I have a blood phobia.
Oh.
And also germs.
Yeah, it's very germy.
I just imagine like because they're kids as well, so my brain is like they're outside. They probably have like dirt particles.
Okay. What about I know you have a blood phobia, and you're if anybody might not know about you, you're a little into witchy things.
Yeah.
So if a ritual called for you to use blood, your own blood, do you think you could surmise it?
I mean,
I'm just going to be upfront. Usually you're able to completely forego anything you don't want to use.
Well, I just want to know, would you be willing?
My own blood, I guess, if I had to.
Where would you slice it?
Oh no! I couldn't.
Okay, yeah, maybe we don't talk about this.
No, I'm trying to. I'm imagining, and I'm like, oh no, I can't.
Okay.
Don't imagine. It's okay. We're fine.
I can't. IRL blood is just not it for me.
Not your vibe, man.
You have to put me under to take my blood, and then I would probably dissociate really hard.
No, we've been talking a little bit about how they had to really take some of the stuff out from the book and all the violence from the show, but they did show quite a few things. I mean, like when Richie's in the library and all those balloons are popping like right in front of everybody. It's just splat. It is
There's so many legendary scenes.
Yeah.
Wait, so I have a question. So I'm sorry, Geraldine, you can stop me at any point. Mm-hmm. But so the blood in movies doesn't bother you?
Because I know it's fake.
No, okay. But so it's more of a concept of you and your blood, really. Yeah.
Or other people's blood. I don't want to see it.
But in like
a
real
sense.
Thing.
I have the same thing with the blood thing.
Yeah.
I couldn't be in the same room with my grandma when she pricked her finger for the diabetes machine.
No, I can handle getting my, because I've had my finger pricked before. I don't like it, but I can handle that.
I pass out when I get my blood drawn.
I didn't pass out when I got my blood drawn. I dissociated very hard though. Like I literally felt myself being outside of my body, and then later I was eating Mexican food, like thinking, oh yes, I'm gonna be like really like happy in my happy place, and I was just like, I don't feel very good.
And other people, they just take it like a champ.
Yeah, they're like, it's not a big deal, and I'm like, you don't understand.
Literally,
they're taking something out of me.
I don't know if we've talked about this story before on the podcast, but Franklin a couple years ago sliced his finger open, and I had to take him to the ER. And anyways, Geraldine, you can stop me if you need me to.
It's okay.
You're looking sick.
I'm looking at his finger.
I'm not going to go into any details, but Frankie, as he was getting stitches, I was in the same room as him, and he wasn't looking. He was looking away. He was trying to dissociate. He was in a lot of pain, and I was over here just watching it happen.
Bailey was just watching him stitch my finger up.
Yeah. I could never be a nurse or a doctor and work in that thing, but I am vastly intrigued by it.
I couldn't look. I was looking completely the other direction.
Like gore in a movie, I'm like, ooh, but like in real life, I'm like, ooh,
interesting. I'm
intrigued.
The opposite. Yeah. I'm the opposite because like IRL, I don't want to see that. In a specific
setting.
Don't want to see that shit. But I just know there's movie props and stuff like that. Like the gorier, the better. Like Eli Roth's, like Thanksgiving was gory as hell, and I was like, yeah. I don't know. Now, if it does get a little sensitive, like anything involving eyeballs, sometimes like that, it just like, I'm like, ooh, no, I can't. Ooh.
Kind of feel it happening to yourself.
Yes. Like there are some certain things that make me feel icky, but most of the time I'm okay. But yeah, the sex scene apparently was used as the metaphor for transitioning into adulthood because Pennywise would then be like, oh yeah, you put me off. I don't want to try to eat you now. Which is weird, but whatever. Go off with Stephen King, weirdo. So he's a monster without really much of an origin story in the miniseries, but apparently they have chapters from Pennywise's perspective in the book, which I think is really cool. And he's sort of like this elder god that is
been around for forever. There's some trippy stuff in the book. In the book, they do drugs, and they have a vision of like a comet crashing into Earth, and like Pennywise being the comet. And like,
could you imagine just his face just?
While they're tripping in the sewer, there's a point where like Bill, I think it is, sees a vision of a turtle with the earth on its back. And
yes. I have that. I wrote it down. I was like, and some mentioning of a turtle because I couldn't remember exactly how they mentioned it.
Discworld, yeah.
Yeah, it's very like trippy what goes on in the book.
Yeah, and similar in both the movie and the book. It seems like the town ignores everything that fucking happens.
Yeah, I thought this was very interesting. I'll give you one of my theories while I was watching the movie that I've since changed my mind on. But when I was watching the movie, I was like, oh. None of this is happening. Like you said, any of the adults, none of them saw.
I'm so sorry.
That's the loudest sneeze I've ever heard.
I couldn't
Were you trying to hold it in?
Yes. I was trying to look at you, and then I was like, it's not going to work. I have to hold it in. It didn't happen.
Okay.
I couldn't help it. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. I don't care.
So you had a theory.
Are you done?
It could be a clip. Yeah. You said you had a theory.
I had a theory while I was watching it where I thought that none of the adults saw everything that was going on. Beverly would show the sink full of blood. her dad couldn't see any of it. And this happened too, where Bill tried to show this book that was bleeding to his parents, and they couldn't see it either. They were like, come on, let's get out of here. And my idea was that none of this is actually happening. And they're all in a shared delusion, which is something that happens. It's an interesting part of
Delulu.
Yeah, they were all delulu together, which is something that happens in real life. Like a group of people can believe this one thing that none of them have ever actually experienced, but because it's in a community, they feel strongly that these events happen.
It's kind of like that little bit. Well, because it's a coming of age story, which I knew would draw you in because you said you personally love that.
That's why all the sex stuff is like
the trauma bond, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of trauma bonding. I mean, this whole movie is a statement on a lot of things, and I think this is a great lens to talk about that theory. And just because I think the acting also kind of alludes to that theory, because when they're adults, I feel like they're still talking like they're kids.
Yeah.
And they're kind of almost having to convince each other. To me, is what it feels like. Oh yeah, and you know the clown, right? And they're like, oh yeah, the clown. And like they're kind of sharing in this trauma. And that's what I thought. But now that I know a little more about it, I think that was just the acting of the time. I don't think that theory is true or whatever. But I think it's more so the commentary on a lot of things. One of them being children neglect. Yeah. And how we all live in this kind of like cyclical, ironic thing where as children, we are let down by the adults around us in a lot of ways. You know, and look, we talk about bigotry, anti-Semitism, racism, misogyny, and how all our characters in this novel go through that. You know, they have to face these great odds, and we as kids had to go through similar things. I know that the three of us, I know none of us have any childhood trauma, but you know, I know that other people, everybody else, they probably do. And
well, one of the things that you just said that really, really like struck with me was that it's a cyclical thing, but like what I've noticed is that they're all going through this trauma, and like they're supposed to just be okay because they're kids. Yeah, like that's something that we just expect from children.
That's what happens.
It doesn't matter what you go through. Your child, children are kind of supposed to be presented as happy and you know, just keep going on. They're resilient.
But we do that, and then when we have kids, the roles flip. Now we are part of the contributors to this new generation of children who have to overcome the same kind of odds, and there's no way to go without any of the trauma. There's gonna be trauma, and I think I really like how Stephen King made the story, and we see it in the adaptation as well, as this town of Derry is its own character, and it represents that. It represents the adults that are letting all these different things fall through the cracks because it's too awful to approach it directly.
They referred to it as the Derry disease in the movie at some point. I'm not sure if there's any mention of that in the book, but I thought it was very interesting because, like, I don't know, like all of these characters have really shitty home lives, and Bill is blaming himself for George's death. His parents are kind of like, they kind of died with George in that aspect. So they're really neglectful of him, and they kind of, it's almost like the, that I wish it was you instead kind of vibe. It's what I feel like the parents give off there. And then you have Bev, who doesn't want to be home because her dad's also a drunk and like sexually and physically abuses her, even though we don't really see much of that in this version. I'm kind of glad because it's not, I don't really like to see that.
It's stuff. Uncomfortable, man.
Very uncomfortable.
Yeah, but I do think a lot of those things is Stephen King, I feel like in this novel, gives weight to all those obstacles that people have to face.
The only thing that I really feel like we were missing out on is like learning more, like to get more connection to some of the other characters. Like we don't see anything about Stanley's home life. We do get to see Stanley is a very, logical kind of guy though. So like he doesn't really partake in any of these delulus that his friends are like throwing out there. He's like, guys, this is not effing real. Yeah. Like chill.
Now I will say, talking about like delulu and in the movie they demonstrate it, and this is true for the book as well, where they're like have to remember what happened. And I think this is also a commentary on just memories. One, you lose them as you grow up. Yes. And then two, that I think a lot of our memories, if we don't think about them, we can't really properly recontextualize them until you're an adult, where you can, like when you're a kid, you don't know how bad something might have been, and then when an adult, you look back on it and you think, oh, that was kind of messed up.
Yes.
And I think this book kind of covers that in such a like deep way.
But also it also kind of addresses like they're all going through their own trauma as well in their own way. Like Mike, we don't see much of his trauma other than it is like dealing with racism and bullying, which they all kind of have that shared trauma with the bully, which
that's why they're the losers club.
So in this process, like it's also hard to recall memories that are traumatic. A lot of the time you repress them because you're like, LOL, let's push that down. We don't want to feel that.
And
I don't want to,
that.
And you don't actually like process it in a healthy way.
Here as an adult, whenever somebody tells me they're having a hard time, that's my advice to them: repress it. And it's not good for you.
That's not a good coping
It's not good
mechanism.
for you, but it works, I gotta say.
It does not work because it does creep back up.
It's worked for now until it comes creeping back up and bites you in the butt.
I'm a now guy. I don't worry about the future's down the road.
Let future you can get screwed over.
Oh my goodness. So like it's just such a good commentary on like being an outcast, being a child, dealing with so many the changes and puberty and changes in life.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I agree so much. This is why I like coming of age stories, and a lot of them, including film, often have really uncomfortable sex stuff in it.
Really uncomfortable sex stuff, body image.
Yeah, body image, and like when you're a kid, that's a thing that happens, and I just can't give enough credit to Stephen King for really portraying that and the gravitas of it. And I think the adaptation does it well as well.
I think it does handle that stuff pretty well, other than I don't like to think about young preteens engaging in sexual sex, even though I know that is possible and it does happen.
Yeah, and I will say I don't like... I like Ben as a character in the TV series a lot. I don't like how basically he just goes from being like fat kid who was bullied to... He loses weight as an adult, and everybody is telling him, like, oh, you look so good. Now you lost weight. Yeah. And then he gets the girl, and it's,
But how do things go that way? Is that's what we appreciate, isn't it? For we don't appreciate fat people. Like, we like you better when you're hot and skinny.
Well, speak for yourself, but...
Culturally.
I mean... I don't like that trope though, because it reinforces you're not worthy of good things unless you lose your weight.
Yeah, but I think that's what the movie's talking about. It beats you over the head with like, you're worthless, you're worthless, you're worthless, whether it's because you're black or Jewish or fat.
It does speak to society because that is what society ingrains in us. So then we feel like we're not worth it. With Eddie's character, I think that's another cool take about him saying, I'm a virgin, because you get beaten over the head with sexuality, sex sells. Sex appeal, everything. And I think that like for him to say, I'm a virgin, like that is his like big secret to share. I think that like that says something. That says something.
And this movie deals with that very well. I think this whole approach to children and how like we were talking about trauma earlier and how childhood trauma echoes as an adult. The things you went through as a kid affect how you go through life as an adult, and the long-standing things. Things that you wouldn't expect.
Okay, so we have reached a halfway point because 1990 is a very long movie.
Over 3 hours, ladies and gentlemen.
Over 3 hours. And we've been talking for a long time already, so you can only imagine. There's going to be a lot more ground to cover that we haven't even gone to. So we're going to make this a stopping point. Yeah. So this is the end of part 1.
Yeah. Stay tuned for part 2. Stay
tuned for part 2 coming soon.
Thank you for listening to Fright or Flight, a Live Oaks Village production. This episode was hosted by Geraldine Johnson and Saul Alberto Arizmendi Ochoa, edited and produced by me, Bailey B., and music composition by Saul Alberto Arizmendi Ochoa.